As we start to dive into Chapter 1, we want to focus on 3 specific questions that's going to start to examine social psychology. We want to look at how people think about, how people are influenced, as well as how they relate to one another in different group settings. We introduce this social psychology discipline with different examples from research, from literature, as well as from current events, are things that will be covered as you move through not just this chapter, but throughout the course itself. As you start reading through your text and learning more about social psychology and its concepts and terms, these are just some questions to consider about social psychology's big ideas and what it is that we study in social psychology, how humans, our values influence social psychology. Is it just common sense? There's a lot about hindsight bias in social psychology, and we will also examine research methods and how we use research methods to study and perform research in social psychology. When we study social psychology, it's the study of how individual or group behavior is influenced by the presence of others. We behave differently when other people are around. Social psychologists ponder how and why people's perceptions and actions are influenced by these environmental factors such as social interaction. So they might seek specific questions, answers to specific questions such as, is human behavior an accurate indication of personality? How goal-oriented is social behavior? How does social perception influence behavior? How do potentially destructive social attitudes such as prejudice form? For example, have you ever noticed that you act and think differently among people you know than you do among strangers? Have you ever wondered why that is? Social psychologists spend their careers trying to determine the answers to questions like these and what that might mean. So we'll look at a bunch of experiments that were done, early on since the turn of the 20th century, experiments back to the 1800s, all throughout the course as we go. As we look to explore different parts of social psychology, we look at social thinking. This is how we perceive ourselves as well as how we perceive other people. Our perception tells us a lot about who we are and how we perceive the world around us, which helps us make decisions in our lives and how we act and how we move forward with our lives, what we believe about the world around us and other people, judgments that we make, as well as this helps to shape our attitudes and beliefs about things. Social influence. This is part our culture, and not just our culture in terms of where we came from and our family, but also the culture of our community that we live in, the pressure that we feel to conform to others around us, how easily we are persuaded or not, and obviously we're influenced by the groups that we hang around, that we associate with. Social relations relates to the prejudice, aggression, attraction and intimacy, as well as our desire to help others. We construct our own social reality. So we sometimes refer to this as social construction of reality. This refers to the theory that the way we present ourselves to other people is shaped partly by our interactions with others, as well as by our life experiences. How we were raised and what we were raised to believe affect how we present ourselves, how we perceive others, and how others perceive us. Our perceptions of reality are colored by our beliefs and backgrounds. Our reality is also a complicated negotiation. What is real depends on what is socially acceptable. Most social interactions involve some acceptance of what's going on. While we participate in the construction of reality, it's not entirely a product of our own doing. How we define everyday situations depends on our respective backgrounds and experiences. As an example, a wealthy individual whose basic survival needs are met many times over buys his pets gourmet organic food that costs more per week than the weekly earnings of a minimum wage worker. He is proud that he is able to take such good care of his animals and insists that it's the right thing to do, if one really loves his pets. After all, his vet was the one who recommended that he buy that brand. A minimum wage worker who loads that food into the rich person's car might feel anger when he realizes how much money this individual spends on his pets. The minimum wage worker might fume that this man's pets eats better than he does. He might wonder whether this rich man has any concept of reality. The wealthy individual has learned through interactions with others that spending money on one's pets is a worthy expense. His reality is one of pride. The minimum wage worker has learned through interactions with others spending that much money on a pet is a negative thing, so his perception of that situation is entirely different. What is the real reality? Is buying a pet expensive food the right thing to do, or is it a waste of money? According to a sociologist, Thomas, if a person perceives that a situation as real, then it's real in its consequences. This statement is also known as the Thomas theorem. In other words, our behavior depends not on the objective reality of a situation, but on our subjective interpretation of reality. The consequences and results of behavior make it real. Intuition helps to make snap decisions sometimes. We use our intuition to help us determine, should we do this, should we not do this? There's a little bit more that we'll look at as we dive deeper into social psychology in later lectures and readings. You'll look at automatic processing, implicit memory, heuristics, things like instant emotion, nonverbal communication. All of this coincides with whether or not we should move forward with our intuition, our gut feeling on things. Past experiences play a role in our intuition and whether or not we should make snap judgments and, go with what it is that we feel. We oftentimes kind of move through life on this automatic pilot. We just kind of intuitively judge what it is that we should do, what comes to mind, mental images that we get. Sometimes we restrain ourselves from these impulsive intuitions and we tend to think more critically. Our intuitions and this unconscious information that we process regularly can be very powerful and sometimes perilous in certain situations. So we should always, trust our instincts to some extent, but also think critically when need be so that we don't make snap judgments that may not be in our best interest. Our personal experiences and our personal attitudes and our beliefs play a lot when it comes to decisions that we make and what we decide to do and how willing we are to help other people and if we're susceptible to peer pressure or not. These internal forces that we have affect how we interact with other people. It's all based on experiences. Social psychology is all about interacting with other people, and the interactions that we've had with our environment around us is going to help shape our belief system and what we commit to in life and, the choices that it is that we make. Some people, based on their experiences, are more willing to help other people out in need. Other people, not so much, because maybe they've, had bad experiences from helping out, and they've been burned too many times. More other people are more susceptible to peer pressure. They're not as willing to stand against somebody and say, no, I don't want to do that. Um, we get involved with politics and whether we vote or not because we have strong beliefs in, certain events or certain rights. And so people get involved in politics as a result of that. So different experiences that we've had, whether they're from our family life, in interactions with friends, colleagues, other people in our community, has helped to shape, what it is that we commit to and what it is that we have these, drives for to do in life. Obviously, with social psychology, we talk a lot about the environment, but there is a nature and nurture side to it because, there's a biological side. We get some traits inherited from our mothers and some traits inherited from our fathers. So we can't deny that there is a biological component to who we are. So that biological component of who we are, the DNA that makes us up, those traits that are inherited, get shaped and reshaped and molded differently based on our experiences as we move through life. And so our social and our emotional processes, part of that goes back to the neuroscience, how our brains are wired, how we perceive situations, how signals are sent, what type of emotions we process, how often, how fast, how we experience them, how we feel them. All of that interacts and is biologically rooted within us and is going to play a role in our social experiences. So social behavior is, suggested that it's biologically rooted and that we are biopsychosocial organisms as a whole. So hindsight bias is where the individual perceives the likelihood of an outcome to be significantly higher once it's happened. People believe that they thought the outcome was certain even though they weren't sure before the event or something happened. With hindsight, though, it seems like we knew the outcome before it took place and therefore believed that it was our original thought all along. Uh, so the individual claims to have been able to predict the event after it was happened, saying something like, I knew it would have happened that way, or yeah, I told you that was going to be, the winner. Uh, like, for example, a stockbroker may be uncertain about a stock and decides not to buy it. However, 2 months later, its value increases by 50%, and they claim they knew it would rise, yet they had the feeling at the time it was not strong enough for them to take the risk and invest. Another example is like, Mr. and Mrs. Jones are at the horse race, and after eating, they decided to watch the race together. They look at Daisy, which is a horse runner, and she's not. Mrs. Jones is not convinced that Daisy's going to win. She thinks the odds are 50-50 at the time, but Mrs. Jones decides not to place the bet because she's not so sure that she's going to win. But later, Mr. and Mrs. Jones watch the race and Daisy wins. And Mrs. Jones states, I knew she would win. In her mind, she thought Daisy was a sure winner. However, she's recalling her thoughts after the race and thereby inflating her originally predicted odds. So rather than thinking Daisy was a 50-50 bet, she recalls that she thought it was close to 100%. So hindsight bias occurs when individuals believe that they correctly predicted the event before it occurred, even though they weren't certain to begin with, right? If it was that easy to predict every time, we'd have a lot of people, winning the lottery and making it big in the stock market and things like that. So it's always easy to go back and say after the fact, yes, that, they knew all along that that was going to be the outcome, right? So we see this a lot, and consider it to be one of the criticisms in social psychology, along with common sense. Common sense is very not so common today, I guess. Very subjective in what's considered common sense. So we'll get into that more too as we go.